enjoy the journey.
Introduction: Why I Wrote This Book. It was the spring of 1994, and I hadn't attended church my entire freshman year of college. I honestly had little interest in attending church since I didn't have to. I was too busy enjoying the freedom of finally being outside my parents' supervision. Although I grew up in church and knew right from wrong, I was struggling with lust and immorality. I never read my Bible. At the time, my sister was, quote unquote, on fire for the Lord and kept trying to get me to experience the things she was experiencing. But I was not interested. That is, until the deacon of a local church came to my college campus and offered to lead a Bible study for me and my friends on Friday nights. He seemed pretty cool, so my friends and I figured we'd entertain the idea and give him a chance. Little did I know that one seemingly insignificant decision would lead me into a toxic relationship with a local church that lasted more than 4 years. Things started out great. The Friday night Bible studies ignited a fire within me to finally take my walk with God seriously. I started reading the Bible from time to time, and naturally I started attending the deacon's church. At first, everything was so exciting and new. The worship and sermons brought me to tears each week as I wrestled with my fleshly desires and my new identity as a devoted follower of Christ. Later, I joined the worship team and even had the opportunity to facilitate a small group study of a discipleship curriculum called Experiencing God. But soon, I began noticing things that just didn't line up with what I was reading in the Bible. For example, week after week, I was being pressured to speak in tongues, and I began to feel out of place because I couldn't. Church members often spoke in tongues with no interpretation, which left me confused. Even the pastor would break out in tongues in the middle of his sermon. The worship leader did the same during worship. I also encountered a phenomenon called, quote, being slain in the spirit, end quote. The pastors would lay hands on people and they would just fall down. I didn't know what was happening or why the pastors were doing this. At times, they even tried forcing me to fall down and seemed annoyed or disappointed when I didn't. They interpreted this as resistance to the work of the Spirit and implied that I was just stifling their anointing. All of this made me feel extremely uncomfortable. But as is so often the case with those who experience abuse, whether spiritual or otherwise, I didn't know how to speak up or remove myself from the situation. To make matters worse, the pastor frequently spoke a prophetic word over my life, and because it came from a spiritual leader, I was expected to follow blindly. There was no room to question his spiritual authority. The warning signs kept piling up. One day, my friends and I went to the leaders of the church and confessed that we were struggling with sexual immorality. Instead of just teaching us what the Bible said or providing practical guidance for breaking free from habitual sin, they invited us into a small back room where they laid hands on us and prayed against the evil spirits of lust within us. The meeting turned into what some would call an exorcism. They were laying hands on us so aggressively that they left physical marks on my body as they sought to drive out the lustful demons. At that point, I knew this church had serious issues. All of the signs were there, but unfortunately, I wasn't able to admit that I needed to get out. This church was the only spiritual home I knew. I was also afraid that if I left the church, God would be angry with me and I would forfeit the blessings available only to those under the spiritual covering and authority of the church leaders. I was being misled. Yet, in spite of the false doctrine, the manipulation, and the abuse, I didn't have the strength to walk away. Then, something else happened. Rumors had been flying around for years that the pastor struggled with same-sex attraction. I initially shrugged it off. He was a tall, well-built, handsome man with a wife and 2 kids, and so I figured that the people spreading the rumors were either jealous or